Welcome to the Microsoft Partner Network podcast. Every week, we bring in industry leaders and Microsoft partners to talk about the big ideas shaping business and technology today. In today's episode, we're talking with Kati Quigley, Senior Director of Partner Marketing and Recruiting, about the value of community and how building strong partnerships can lead to lasting success. Hey, Kati, great to have you in the studio today.
Thanks, Rachel.
Kati actually was one of the first podcasts that we did when she was interviewing the general around the work that Microsoft does with veterans, but more than anything has been at Microsoft 15 plus years. So please tell people a little bit more about your journey and especially your journey as a leader here at Microsoft.
Great, sure, thanks. And so happy to be here to talk about this. So I started at Microsoft 15 years ago. I was previously working for nonprofits. So it was a huge culture shock for me to come into a large corporation. And with that, I also inherited a team of 20 people. And I was a manager of managers. And so it was a group that had worked together for a long time. And suddenly they're told, here's your new leader. She doesn't have any experience with Microsoft or technology, but trust us, she'll be a great leader for you. And so, right away, they were literally making bets on how long I would actually last. I think 2 years might have been the longest. And so, because it just was such a strong culture shock. And then to have to lead so many people that had so much experience was, it was a little intimidating. And so I leaned on what I knew best, is that I love to manage. I was a manager before coming here. And so I thought, what is it that is going to create this trust in them? And so building a strong culture around this group that they were all, it was the events team, and they were all very strong event executors. They had a ton of experience. And so I thought, how is it that we connect with each other? Because we've got that core piece of knowing how to execute on amazing events together. And so we just started talking and getting to know each other. And I was able to share experiences with them. And I think that that's a core piece of community. It may not be in the same setting, or it may not have been at the same time where the experiences come from, but there's common factors that come into it that you start to feel a connection. You're like, oh, right, I had the exact same thing happen to me. Right. And so that you start to tell stories. And I think stories is a way that builds communities.
Yeah. And, I think Satya has done a really good job of trying to cultivate the culture here at Microsoft, and so much of that growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And it seems like when you're leading and managing people, you have to have an open mind, right?
Yes, you do. And you have to think about how everyone's diversity really does build a stronger team. I had someone tell me early on in my career when I first became a manager, said, hire people that are smarter than you. And that has stuck with me. And so you think about smarter, but also diverse, that they have different backgrounds and they're coming with different experiences. But there is, again, a connection point between those experiences that builds something really great.
How do you think you think about you're managing your teams and that already has interesting dynamics. When you think about actually doing that with a business, for those that are listening on the podcast probably right now, they might be CEOs of like a 50-person business. How do you change any of that management style? What's your kind of thinking on that from all the leadership training that you've done?
Sure. What I see it with Satya, because you think about the hundreds of, the 100,000 people that he's leading, and he obviously doesn't get to talk to everyone. And so I think when you have a larger group of people that you're trying to lead, it's that you're leading by example and that you are your authentic self. And what are those? You have to be super clear. What are your core values and what do you stand for? And then how does that show up every day? And how do you act that out? And so you can't forget those because everybody is watching. When you're leading an organization, people see what you do, even when you don't think they're looking. And so that starts to show that consistency and that belief that you have that others start to model. And then I think you really help those, on the frontline managers understand what are those core values that we as a company want to be and what is our brand. And so then they can understand it and they can start to adapt that to their own value and style system and help their teams get there. And it's kind of a tops down and bottoms up approach to changing the culture. And I see that at Microsoft happening right now.
Yeah, no, when you talk about core values, I was at our industry summit or whatever that was, and what was his, I cannot remember his name, but his Twitter, I'm pretty sure, is New York Times Corner Office, something like that.
Right.
And he does a column, and he wrote a book about his interviews with like 50 of the top CEOs. He's interviewed basically everybody.
Oh, great.
And he has all these amazing insights. And he said when people go through their core values, it always stops at 3. So if you have, like, whenever these CEOs would try to talk about their core values,
Right.
none of them could remember past 3. And so he'd always talk about this like 3 thing.
Right.
But I think it's a really good point when you think about your teams and you think about greater scale that you can't just keep it kind of simple.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and you think about Microsoft has 3 core pillars,
Yep.
so that makes sense. And I think you're right. It applies to your own personal values, but who is a company that you want to be? How do you want to show up? And you think about the companies that you admire, and you really do truly know what their core values are. I think about, say a company like Tom's who gives away shoes. Their core value is ensuring that they are a good global citizen. And so that's something that comes out in everything that they do.
Yeah. What is some of your best and worst experiences as a manager? Like, do you have any good stories in how you managed through that?
That's a great question. I think, I've been a manager for so long. I think the best experiences I have, which is going to sound a little bit strange, but I am the proudest when I see someone who is able to move to a new job that's helping them grow. And as sad as I am personally to lose that person, I am excited that I was able to play a part in helping them progress and get clear about what they wanted to do next and how they wanted to grow. And I know that connection will always be there.
Yeah.
I think the probably the hardest points are when I just can't find that connection point with someone.
Yeah.
When, I think that person has really great skills, but we just can't find a personal connection to go on. And I think that's when communication starts to fall apart. Mm-hmm. And that's when it's a really hard thing. 'Cause, I do feel like a parent sometimes that I didn't succeed with this one.
Yeah. It's about fit, and ultimately fit is the culture.
Yes, definitely.
And that's what the culture, whatever that vibe is.
Right. Then that goes to core values.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it all fits
exactly. What do you think about how this applies to partners? We talk a lot about partners working together. If you think about IoT or so many things out there, you really need to work together.
Right.
Most stuff can't be done alone anymore as a business. What do you think about when partners are trying to partner together? How do you build that relationship?
It's really interesting because you think about those partner-to-partner connections, and we talk a lot about this, and we encourage partners when they're building solutions because the breadth could be so great that they should find other partners that are complementary. And it's interesting, though. I've talked to so many partners about what's worked and what hasn't worked. And going back to this conversation, they always say culture is first. Yeah. And they say that they first have to make sure that the two company cultures are similar and that they do agree on how they treat customers, how they work together, how they treat their teams. If that isn't there, it doesn't matter how fantastic the solution might be. It eventually falls apart. And the customer sees that. The customer sees that they don't really gel, and that then they lose confidence that even if the solution is a good technical solution, that they actually won't be able to deliver.
Yeah. And I recall our partners saying it's literally about trust. If you sit down and have a drink or coffee or whatever the case is, and you feel like something might be sketchy or you don't feel a fit, it's out. Like that.
Right.
That
in your gut,
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is kind of hard if you think about it because we're so global now. How do you build connections like that when you're trying to do global work? And I think some of the communities that we're building, Microsoft Partner Community, if you think about social media, actually helps build a community in a very digital, virtual form. What do you think about how do you use that as a way to build partnerships?
Right. I think that you're right. I think that now in this global world and the fast pace, that starting in a digital engagement is okay. And I think it's probably the most efficient way. And I think there's a few ways to go about it to make sure that you're starting to understand who that person is or who their company is. We have our Microsoft partner community that's up and live, and you can start to post things, ask questions, and start to learn, just at a base level, what's their knowledge? Do they have a good track record as a partner? But then you can start to learn about their personality. There's so much to find on people's social networks and channels. You start to see, what are the things that they're posting about? What do they say? Who do they follow? How do they connect? You go into LinkedIn and you find, what are all these connection points? And I think that if someone is connected to someone that I trust and believe, I think, well, they must be a pretty good person.
Yeah.
Like, I know someone that wanted to connect with me on LinkedIn, and we had one mutual connection, and it was, Chris Capasolo, who's our CMO. And I thought, okay, if
there's
Chris
a good chance that we have that connection.
Exactly. He has a lot of credibility. And so you could really understand quite a bit like that. But you're right. I think that face-to-face is so important. And, we have Microsoft Inspire, which is a fantastic opportunity to have those conversations and to, do work ahead of time, that when you get to be face-to-face, you've already done all the prep work. And so it's a point in time that you can make a lot of progress in person. If you can't do that, which is totally understandable because not everyone can, we have video. We have Skype,
right,
which is awesome.
Say, yeah.
I talked to a partner in Spain the other day, and she was on video. I joined Skype without the video, and there she was on video. And she said, I don't have any calls anymore that aren't video.
That's the same with LinkedIn.
Of the trust. I think that's a great
video-only
practice.
Culture, and I really like it.
I do too. I'm seeing it more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, another partner that lives in DC, he had a whole backdrop behind him because he said, this is where I sit for my video calls. And he is a true believer in P2P. And that's how he starts to connect.
Yeah. Because you can't be doing work
right
while you're videoing with someone.
You can't, right?
Which, how many times are you on a 20-person Skype call and you're working on something else?
Oh, yeah. And someone calls you out for something, you're like, oh,
and I'm like,
right.
What? Can you repeat that again?
Exactly.
That happens so often.
It does.
When you talk about creating a culture. I'd love to see that kind of culture embedded more in more companies, right? You're kind of holding people accountable. If you're worried about being on video with somebody, then you probably shouldn't be in that meeting.
Exactly. You should probably set aside time to do the other work. And I know it's hard because time is at a premium, but there's studies that show you can't multitask. And so
many studies
don't have the call then.
Yeah. Why do you think that community really benefits your business? What are some of the outcomes by partnering together and getting to know your customers, et cetera? Why do you think that is so beneficial?
I think there's several reasons. I think first I'll start with, what are the solutions that you're building? And I think with the solutions, it can build efficiencies and innovation. With efficiencies, it's because you can learn from each other. I know another partner that he lives in California, and he meets regularly with a partner, probably by video chat, hopefully, who lives in New York. And they have the exact same business model. And they would be competitors if they lived in the same geography. But because they don't, and the size of their business is a little bit smaller, they don't worry about that. And so they literally open up the books to each other and say, okay, how are you modeling your business? How are you building your revenue, your net revenue? And how is it that you're staffing? And they learn from each other. And so they get to a solution a lot faster. The other area is innovation. And I have one of my favorite books. It's called The Medici Effect, and it's Franz Johansson. He's awesome. And he talks about these random interactions of people thought that when you put the two together, they wouldn't necessarily alone come up with a solution, but when you put them together, they do come up with a solution. Mm-hmm. For instance, one of the best stories that I've heard is I've been in events a lot of my career, and there was a very large trade show called the Hardware Show. And it was dying. Like, nobody really wanted to go look at hammers.
Show?
Right?
Yep,
that's not very exciting. But it had been one of the top trade shows in the world, and it was losing attendance. And so the organizers went to American Girl store, and they looked at the experience that they built at American Girl store, that it was immersive, end-to-end, fully engaging, And they thought, okay, maybe instead of just having aisles and aisles of hardware, we should build this immersive experience. And so they followed that model. And so you would never connect dolls and hardware together.
Right.
And so that's kind of the idea around these, what are these intersections that are unique? And I think partners, when they meet other partners that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise, they come up with some stunning ideas that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah. That's an awesome example. Where in your experience, both personally and then in your work, have you had to kind of create these intersections for something new and amazing to happen?
Sure. Finding intersections can happen just about any time. I think on the very easiest level is that you can commit to doing something like a 30-minute coffee conversation with people around the company that you might not know. Maybe there's a connection that you can reach out and say, hey, we both know this person. It would be really great to spend 30 minutes. I just want to ask you these 3 questions about your business, just so I learn a little bit more about it. And I've always found everyone says yes to that. I've never had anyone say, actually, no, I don't really want to do that.
Yeah.
And in those conversations are unexpected surprises about things about their business. I had made assumptions and I learned something new every single time that I met with someone for 30 minutes. And I can connect that back to my work and think, okay, so if it works for their business, how would it actually work for mine? And so it helps me on 2 levels. One, on the business side of how do I lead my team in a direction that's innovative? And then how do I personally make more connections that I wouldn't normally, that I then have someone that I can feel like I can go back to for other questions or just to have as a broader network. I think on the larger business broads level, again, like I said, I'm an events person at my core, and that's what I learned early on in my career. And so I always think about—
What was the first WPC you went to?
My first one was in 2003.
Okay.
And then I was the business owner of WPC, which is now Inspire, for 4 years.
All right.
And so my first year as the business owner, I went and I thought, well, this is impressive. There's so many people here and it's, there's a lot of activity, but it didn't feel like people were engaged. I have this one picture that I love, and it's 4 people sitting on a bench on their phones, not talking to each other, against an empty brick wall. And I thought,
so bored.
This is so bored. and they could have been back at home and doing the exact same thing. Yeah. So why would someone get on an airplane and travel across the world to not be engaged? And I also saw them wanting to be, so they'd go meet in bars that were, outside of the property and that sort of thing. And so, big, huge exhibit hall is hard to make interesting. But I thought, how do people interact naturally? And I just recently had been to New York before that and went on this really cool place in New York, and it's called the High Line. And probably a lot of people have heard of it or seen it. And they took these old train tracks, so super ugly part of the city, and made it beautiful. And it's this long path, that wooden path that has benches, has places to stop, has beautiful greenery. Everything about it is just relaxing and engaging. And I saw people sitting around having conversations that they probably wouldn't normally have when they're in the city that's bustling and busy. Yeah. So let's create that sort of environment at WPC and give people an opportunity just to sit and relax and talk and have conversations that are organic versus ones that are forced. And so we literally put trees and grass and benches all through the exhibit hall. We had this path. We called it the low line. And you saw that. It was amazing. People just felt different, and they were engaged in a different way than if they were on a cement floor talking with fluorescent lights. And so you realize that you can take an experience from someplace completely different and place it into one and another one that's unexpected and interesting and makes people feel comfortable and able to engage in a different way.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of not only the book, but having that growth mindset, thinking outside the box. What is something unexpected? Questioning everything, right?
Right, yes. And that's what I love about this growth mindset that Microsoft has taken on, because it really does make you continuously think differently. Because you did something really well once doesn't mean it's going to continue to be great. You have to always think, what can I do next? What can I do differently? How can I continue to improve this?
Fail fast, Lots of testing,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Speed kills is what I recently just read.
Oh, I like that.
So
Failing is okay as long as you learn from it.
You have to just go for it in this day and age.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's how startups are succeeding.
Right.
So you take chances and let it roll.
Right. There's a story. I don't know the details. I'm a big sports fan. And Michael Jordan, how many times he failed? Like he failed to make the varsity team in high school for basketball, which is incredible to me. Yet he didn't give up. He just kept trying.
Yeah.
And he was pretty successful.
He did okay.
Yeah, he did all right.
Yeah, let's hope Microsoft has the same success.
Right. And us.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if you had a few tips for partners to walk away from in terms of leadership or partnering together, what would you recommend, Katie?
I think that the few things they can do. One is have a voice and know what your voice is and make sure that voice, that you're putting it out in channels. Don't hold back. Don't be, someone that just listens and looks and, and hears other people talk. Mm-hmm. Be out there asking, even if it's just asking questions. It doesn't have to be that you have to going back to, you don't have to know it all. It's going out and saying, I don't know this. Someone help me. And so put yourself out there, be vulnerable to that. Be open to connections that you wouldn't have thought about being open to. And then also really be clear on your own core values and what is it that you'll accept and what is it that you won't. And so when you do make those connections, you are sure to express those and make sure that they're being met.
Thank you so much for coming into the studio today, Katie. I hope everyone learned a lot.
Thanks, Rachel. I loved having the conversation.
Thanks for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and please rate and review if you like what you hear. Also, follow us at MS Partner on Twitter and Facebook. Tune in next week for more great insights from business leaders and innovators shaping the tech industry today.